The war began on a Tuesday morning when a Chromac patrol ship fired on a Saurian mining vessel near the Centauri border. General Thought claimed the Saurians had violated territorial agreements. Ambassador Kethvar insisted the mining ship had been in neutral space. Without human mediators to establish the facts and calm tempers, both sides chose to believe the worst about each other. Within hours, the conflict spread across 3 star systems. Chromac battle fleets moved to protect their territory from what they saw as Saurian aggression. Saurian defense forces mobilized to counter what they believed was Chromac expansion. Other species were forced to choose sides or flee from the combat zones. Captain Ziltara received the news of the war, while Starweaver searched the Outer Rim territories for any sign of humanity. Her crew had been looking for 8 months without success. They had explored dozens of star systems beyond the edge of Council space. They had found ancient ruins, strange phenomena, and unexplored worlds, but no trace of human colonies. Captain, her communications officer, reported, "We are receiving distress signals from 17 different worlds. The war is spreading faster than anyone expected." Ziltara stared at the tactical display showing the expanding conflict. Red markers indicated battles in progress. Yellow markers showed worlds under threat. Green markers represented the few remaining neutral systems. The pattern looked like a disease spreading through the galaxy's circulatory system. "How many casualties?" she asked. "Preliminary reports suggest over 50,000 dead in the first 3 days of fighting. The numbers are getting worse as more species are drawn into the conflict." The war was different from previous galactic conflicts. In the past, human peacekeepers had worked to contain fighting and protect civilian populations. Human intelligence services had provided accurate information that prevented misunderstandings from escalating. Human diplomats had created communication channels that allowed enemies to negotiate even while they fought. Without human involvement, the war quickly became chaotic and brutal. Military commanders on both sides made decisions based on incomplete information and cultural prejudices. Attacks on civilian targets increased because no one was working to maintain the traditional rules of engagement. Neutral species were drawn into the fighting because there were no trusted mediators to help them avoid conflict. The Talari merchant fleets, which had once carried goods safely throughout the galaxy, became targets for both sides. Chromac forces seized Talari ships carrying supplies to Saurian worlds. Saurian raiders attacked Talari convoys that might be helping the Chromac military. The interstellar economy that had supported galactic civilization for centuries began to collapse as trade became impossible. Meanwhile, on the ruined hulk of Nexus Prime, engineer Vorthek made a discovery that changed everything. While searching through abandoned human quarters for spare parts, he found a hidden data cache that contained detailed records of human activities throughout the galaxy. The files revealed the true scope of humanity's contributions to galactic civilization. The records showed that humans had not just participated in the Council. They had been its invisible foundation. Every major achievement in the past 3 centuries had involved human expertise in some way. The Great Peace Treaty between the Valix and Nexari had been written by human diplomats. The trade networks that connected thousands of worlds had been designed by human economists. The scientific breakthroughs that had improved life for billions of beings had been discovered by human researchers working in collaboration with alien scientists. But the most shocking discovery was a series of files labeled contingency planning. The documents showed that human leaders had been preparing for their departure for over 50 years. They had gradually reduced their species' dependence on Council infrastructure while secretly building alternatives. They had trained backup personnel from other species to handle some human responsibilities, but they had been careful not to share their most critical knowledge. The contingency plans revealed that humanity had expected to be marginalized or controlled eventually. They had studied the history of other species in the Council and noticed a pattern. Useful species were welcomed and valued until they became too successful or independent. Then they were quietly managed and contained to prevent them from challenging the established order. Humanity had decided to avoid that fate by leaving before they could be controlled. They had spent decades preparing their exit strategy, building new colonies and infrastructure in secret locations beyond the galaxy's edge. The departure had not been a sudden emotional decision. It had been a carefully planned escape from a relationship that was slowly becoming a trap. Forthak shared his discovery with the surviving council members who had gathered on the Valix homeworld. The revelation that humanity had been planning their departure for decades was both humbling and terrifying. It meant that the current crisis was not just an unfortunate accident. It was the predictable result of the Council's failure to treat humanity as true partners rather than useful servants. High Counselor Zephyra studied the human contingency plans with growing amazement. The documents showed a level of long-term thinking and strategic planning that her own species had not achieved despite their intellectual pride. The humans had not just prepared to leave, they had prepared to thrive after leaving. They had identified the knowledge and resources they would need to build an independent civilization. They had developed new technologies and social systems that would allow them to grow and explore without council oversight. They were always more advanced than we realized, Zephyra admitted to the emergency council session. Not just technologically, but socially and strategically. While we were debating how to manage them, they were planning how to outgrow us. The war continued to spread as more species chose sides or declared independence from the failing council government. The Flowerian species announced they were following humanity's example by evacuating to unexplored regions beyond the rim. The Symbiont Collective, which had already left council space, sent messages encouraging other peaceful species to join them in creating new alliances far from the war zones. Captain Shiltara finally found evidence of humanity's new location when Starweaver detected massive energy signatures in a star system 40,000 light-years beyond the galactic edge. The signatures were unlike anything in council records, but they showed the pattern of industrial activity on a scale that suggested a thriving civilization. When Starweaver emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, Siltara and her crew found something that took their breath away. Orbiting a yellow star similar to Earth's sun was a structure that dwarfed any space station ever built by council species. The construction was clearly artificial, but it was beautiful in a way that combined function with artistic vision. The structure was surrounded by hundreds of ships of designs that were familiar yet evolved beyond anything in council space. Human engineering had always been elegant, but these vessels showed advances that represented centuries of development compressed into decades of intensive research. Shiltara broadcast a message requesting permission to approach. The response came quickly in perfect galactic standard, but the voice that spoke was unmistakably human. Captain Ziltara of the Council vessel Starweaver, you are welcome in human space. Please follow the navigation beacon to Docking Bay 7. Admiral Morrison is waiting to meet with you. Jake Morrison had aged in the years since leaving council space, but he looked healthier and more confident than Ziltara remembered. He greeted the council delegation in a conference room that overlooked the vast human construction project. Through the windows they could see ships coming and going, construction crews working on new sections, and what looked like entire cities built inside the rotating sections of the massive structure. You built all this in less than 2 years? Ziltara asked in amazement. Morrison smiled. We had been planning and preparing for much longer than that. And we had advantages here that we never had in council space. No bureaucracy to slow down decisions. No committees to debate every innovation. No regulations that prevented us from building what we needed. We could work at the speed of human creativity instead of the speed of galactic politics. The delegation from the council explained the crisis that had followed humanity's departure. They described the failing infrastructure, the economic collapse, the spreading war, and the growing number of species that were abandoning council space. They asked Morrison and his people to return and help restore order to the galaxy. Morrison listened carefully to their report. When they finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke in a voice that was kind but firm. We are sorry to hear about the suffering that is happening in council space. We take no pleasure in the problems that our departure has caused. But we cannot return to the old relationship. We cannot go back to being useful servants who are valued only for what we can provide to others. Ziltara leaned forward. What would it take for humanity to rejoin the council? What do you want from us? Morrison activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy beyond the windows. We want to be partners, not subjects. We want to be consulted before decisions are made that affect us, and Captain Zaldi of the Tellery merchant fleet stared at his navigation computer in confusion. The screen showed 3 different routes to the same destination, and all of them were marked as dangerous. 2 months ago, the routes had been safe and efficient. Human traffic controllers had guided his ships through the safest paths and warned him about pirates, asteroid fields, and solar storms. Now the automated system was giving him contradictory information that made no sense. "Computer, show me the standard route to the Vega trading post," Zalthi said. The computer displayed a path that would take his cargo ships directly through a known pirate territory. A second route showed a course that would use twice as much fuel as necessary. The third route had not been updated in months and led to an old space station that had been abandoned years ago. Zalthi tried calling the Nexus Prime Traffic Control Center. The alien voice that answered sounded stressed and tired. "We are experiencing technical difficulties with our routing system. Please use manual navigation and proceed with caution." Manual navigation meant plotting courses by hand, calculating fuel requirements without computer assistance, and guessing which routes were currently safe. It was how ships had traveled centuries ago, before humans had built the sophisticated traffic control systems that guided vessels across the galaxy. Zalthi had learned manual navigation in school, but he had never needed to use it for real cargo runs. His ship was carrying medical supplies to 6 different worlds. The supplies had expiration dates. If he took too long to deliver them, people would die. But if he chose the wrong route, his ship might be attacked by pirates or damaged by space debris. Either choice could be disastrous. Across the galaxy, thousands of other cargo ship captains were facing the same problem. The interstellar shipping network had depended on human coordination for so long that most people had forgotten how complicated space travel really was. Humans had made it look easy by handling all the difficult calculations and safety checks behind the scenes. On Nexus Prime, Engineer Vorthak was discovering just how many systems had been maintained by human technicians. The station's power grid was showing unusual fluctuations. The artificial gravity generators were making strange noises. The air recycling systems were producing lower oxygen levels than normal. Each problem seemed small by itself, but together they painted a picture of slowly failing infrastructure. Vorthak had found detailed technical manuals for all the major systems, but the manuals did not explain the hundreds of small modifications that humans had made over the years. Human engineers had improved the power efficiency here, upgraded a safety protocol there, and added backup systems in places where the original designers had not thought they were needed. These improvements were not documented in any official records. They existed only in the knowledge and experience of the humans who had made them. The crystalline engineer worked 18 hours a day trying to understand the human modifications. His assistant, Technician Blorg from the fungal-based mycelian species, helped by checking system logs and maintenance records. Blorg was dedicated and hard-working, but he did not have the intuitive understanding of technology that humans possessed. He could follow instructions perfectly, but he could not anticipate problems or invent creative solutions. "The water recycling system in Section 4 is producing contaminated output," Blorg reported. "The filtration units appear to be working normally, but something is wrong." Vorthak examined the system and found that humans had installed an additional purification stage that was not part of the original design. The extra stage had been added after a contamination incident 5 years ago. The modification had prevented similar problems from occurring, but now the extra equipment was failing and no one knew how to repair it. Meanwhile, the political situation on the station was getting worse. Without human mediators, conflicts between different species were escalating quickly. The Chromac delegation was angry about shipping delays and wanted to use their military to force faster deliveries. The Talari representatives were demanding compensation for lost cargo and wasted fuel. The Valix Council members insisted that superior technology could solve all problems, but their proposed solutions were too expensive and complicated to implement quickly. Ambassador Kethvar found himself mediating disputes that Jake Morrison would have resolved in minutes. But Kethvar did not have Morrison's deep understanding of how different species thought and communicated. When the Chromac general spoke about honor and strength, Morrison had known how to translate those concepts into terms that other species could understand. When Talari merchants worried about profit margins, Morrison had helped them find common ground with species who cared more about scientific advancement or artistic expression. Without human translation, both literal and cultural, the different species on the council were rediscovering old prejudices and misunderstandings. The Chromac thought the Valix were arrogant and impractical. The Valix considered the Chromac to be primitive and violent. The Talari believed that everyone else was naive about economic realities. Each species retreated into their own perspectives and stopped trying to understand the others. The first species to leave council space was the Symbiont Collective. They were a peaceful species that had relied heavily on human protection from more aggressive neighbors. Without human peacekeepers and diplomats, the symbionts felt vulnerable and exposed. Their representative delivered a formal notice of withdrawal from the council and announced that their entire species would be relocating to unexplored regions of the galaxy. We came to the council seeking safety and cooperation, the symbiont speaker said. Without our human friends, we no longer feel safe here. We will find our own path among the stars. The withdrawal of the symbionts shocked the remaining council members. For the first time, they realized that humanity's departure might trigger a larger collapse of the galactic government. Other small species began discussing similar moves. The Flowerian ambassadors held private meetings about whether they should stay or leave. The aquatic depths dwellers started making plans for independent exploration missions. High Counselor Zephyra tried to maintain order by proposing new technological solutions to replace human services. The Valix were masters of advanced computing and artificial intelligence. Surely they could build systems that would work better than human-operated networks. But when Valix engineers examined the human-built infrastructure, they discovered something unexpected. The human systems were not just functional, they were elegant. Human engineers had found ways to make complex technologies work together seamlessly. They had anticipated problems that Valix computers had never been programmed to consider. They had built redundancies and safeguards that prevented small failures from becoming large disasters. The systems were not just tools. They were works of art that reflected a deep understanding of how technology should serve the needs of living beings. We can rebuild these systems, Zephyra announced to the council. We can make them better and more efficient than they were before. But when Valix engineers tried to improve on human designs, they discovered that the improvements often made things worse. Human systems had been designed with organic flexibility that allowed them to adapt to unexpected situations. Valix improvements made the systems more rigid and less able to handle the chaos of real-world operations. General Thok was facing his own crisis. The Chromac military had always prided itself on its strength and independence, but Thok was learning that his forces had depended on human support in ways he had never realized. Human technicians had maintained the sophisticated targeting systems on Chromac warships. Human intelligence analysts had provided crucial information about potential threats. Human logistics coordinators had made sure that Chromac military bases had the supplies they needed. Without human support, the mighty Chromac military was struggling with basic operations. Weapon systems were breaking down faster than they could be repaired. Intelligence reports were becoming less accurate and less timely. Supply convoys were getting lost or arriving at the wrong destinations. The final crisis came when a group of pirates attacked a Talari convoy in the Rigel sector. In the past, human peacekeepers would have responded immediately to protect the civilian ships. Chromac patrol vessels would have been guided to the battle by human controllers. Valix intelligence systems would have predicted the attack and warned the convoy to change course. Instead, the attack succeeded completely. The pirates captured 3 cargo ships and killed dozens of innocent crew members. By the time Chromac military ships arrived at the scene, the pirates had disappeared into the asteroid fields where their small, fast ships could hide from larger vessels. The news of the successful pirate attack spread quickly throughout Council space. If the galaxy's most important shipping lanes were no longer safe, then the entire foundation of interstellar commerce was in danger. More species began considering withdrawal from the Council. Even some of the larger, more powerful species started making contingency plans for independent defense. Kethvar stood in the empty human quarters of Nexus Prime and tried to imagine what Jake Morrison would do in this situation. Morrison had always been calm in a crisis. The lights flickered in the main council chamber as Ambassador Kethvar tried to maintain order during the emergency session. 8 species had already announced their intention to leave council space. 3 more were openly discussing it. The representatives who remained were arguing loudly about whose fault it was that everything was falling apart. This is a temporary crisis, High Counselor Zephyra insisted, though her usually perfect composure was showing cracks. We will adapt and rebuild. We do not need human assistance to govern ourselves. General Thok slammed his massive fist on the table. causing several smaller delegates to jump in their seats. Adapt to what? Our ships cannot navigate safely. Our weapons are failing. Our communication systems barely work. How do we adapt to complete system failure? The Talari trade representative stood up, his forearms gesturing frantically. My people have lost fortunes because of shipping delays and route failures. The insurance companies are refusing to cover cargo losses. Some merchant families are facing bankruptcy. Engineer Vorthak entered the chamber carrying a datapad that glowed with urgent status reports. His crystalline body was dim with exhaustion. He had been working for months to keep the station's systems functioning, but he was fighting a losing battle against cascading infrastructure failures. The atmospheric processors in sections 2 through 6 are operating at 60% efficiency, Vorthak reported. The artificial gravity generators are showing stress fractures. The main computer core is experiencing random shutdowns. I estimate we have perhaps 2 weeks before life support becomes unreliable. The chamber fell silent. Nexus Prime was home to 200,000 beings from dozens of different species. If life support failed, they would all die. The station had no backup facilities that could handle that many refugees. Most species' homeworlds were weeks or months away by faster-than-light travel. How is this possible? Demanded the representative from the aquatic depth species. These systems were built to last for centuries. Vorthak looked at his datapad with tired eyes. The systems were built to last centuries with proper maintenance. Human technicians performed thousands of small repairs and adjustments every day. They replaced worn components before they failed. They updated software to handle new situations. They monitored system performance and corrected problems before they became critical. Without that constant attention, even the best technology will eventually break down. Technician Blorg shuffled forward carrying a storage container filled with human data files. The fungal being had been working alongside Vorthak to understand the scope of human involvement in station operations. What they had discovered was both impressive and terrifying. We found backup files from human maintenance teams, Blorg reported in his quiet voice. The humans were not just maintaining the original station systems. They had improved everything. They added safety features that were not in the original blueprints. They created backup systems for the backup systems. They wrote software patches for problems that had not even happened yet. Blorg activated a holographic display that showed the station's infrastructure. Green lines indicated systems that were working properly. Yellow lines showed systems experiencing problems. Red lines marked systems that had already failed. The display looked like a spider web that was slowly being destroyed by fire. The humans were holding this entire station together, Blorg continued. Every section, every level, every system had human fingerprints on it. They were not just workers here. They were the foundation that everything else was built on. Ambassador Keithvar studied the holographic display and felt a deep sadness growing in his chest. He had known Jake Morrison for 12 years. They had worked together on hundreds of different problems. Morrison had always been helpful and professional, but he had never talked about how much work he and his people were really doing. The humans had made their contributions look easy and natural. They had hidden the complexity of what they were accomplishing behind quiet competence and modest attitudes. The discovery of human data files revealed the true scope of their involvement in galactic civilization. Human diplomats had prevented 47 wars through careful negotiation and cultural mediation. Human engineers had designed or improved critical infrastructure on 300 worlds. Human scientists had made breakthrough discoveries in medicine, physics, and biology that had benefited every council species. Human teachers had educated millions of alien children in schools throughout the galaxy, but the humans had shared their knowledge freely without demanding recognition or special treatment. They had worked behind the scenes to make life better for everyone else. They had been content to be useful rather than famous, to be helpful rather than powerful, and the council had taken their contributions for granted because the humans had made them look effortless. "We need to find them," General Thok declared. "We need to bring them back before everything collapses completely." "How?" asked the Valix counselor. "They left no trail. They evacuated their colony so gradually that no one noticed. They could be anywhere in the galaxy by now." Kethavar had been thinking about that problem for weeks. He had studied every report of human activity in the months before their departure. The humans had been shipping equipment and supplies to unknown destinations. They had been building something in secret, somewhere far from Council space. But where? "They have to be beyond the galactic rim," Kethavar said. Somewhere we have never explored. Somewhere they could build new colonies without interference. The Council authorized an immediate search mission. Captain Zilterra of the Depth species was given command of the fastest ship in the Council fleet, a vessel called Starweaver. Her crew included representatives from 6 different species and the best navigation equipment available. Their mission was to find humanity and convince them to return before galactic civilization collapsed entirely. But as Starweaver prepared to depart, the crisis on Nexus Prime reached a critical point. The main computer core suffered a complete failure that left entire sections of the station without environmental controls. Emergency backup systems activated, but they were only designed to last for a few days. Engineer Vorthak and his teams worked desperately to restore primary power, but the human-designed integration protocols were too complex to repair quickly. The evacuation of Nexus Prime began 3 days after Starweaver departed. 200,000 beings had to be transported to safety before life support failed completely. The logistics of moving so many different species was overwhelming. Some beings required special atmospheric conditions. Others needed specific types of food or medical care. The coordination needed to handle such a massive evacuation would have been challenging even with human expertise. Without it, the operation was chaotic and dangerous. 17 people died during the evacuation when a transport ship's environmental systems failed. The ship had been designed to carry humans, and the crew did not know how to adjust the atmosphere for passengers from the methane-breathing Titan species. The passengers suffocated before emergency repairs could be completed. The death of innocent beings because of system failures finally broke High Counselor Zephyra's composure. For the first time in her long career, she admitted that the Valix did not have all the answers. Her species had always prided themselves on their intellectual superiority, but intellectual knowledge was not the same as practical wisdom. The humans had possessed a kind of intelligence that could not be programmed into computers or taught in universities. They had understood how to make complex systems work in the real world, where unexpected problems and emotional beings created chaos that pure logic could not handle. Meanwhile, Captain Zilterra and the crew of Starweaver were discovering how thoroughly humanity had disappeared from known space. They visited 12 human colonies and found them all completely evacuated. The colonies had not been abandoned hastily. Everything valuable had been carefully removed. Infrastructure had been shut down properly. Buildings had been cleaned and secured. The humans had left behind no clues about where they had gone. The search team found only one piece of evidence at the human research station orbiting Proxima Centauri. Hidden in the station's computer core was a message that had been programmed to activate if anyone came looking for the missing humans. The message was from Dr. Lisa Parker. "If you are seeing this message, then you have discovered that humanity has left Council space," Parker's recorded voice said. "We want you to know that this decision was not made in anger. We are grateful for the centuries of cooperation and friendship that we shared with many of you, but we have learned that being useful is not the same as being valued. We have decided to find our own path among the stars. We hope that someday we will meet again as equals." The message contained star charts showing possible routes beyond the galactic rim, but the charts covered millions of cubic light-years of unexplored space. Finding humanity in such a vast area would be like finding a single grain of sand on an ocean beach. As Starweaver continued its search, the situation in Council space grew worse every day. The evacuation of Nexus Prime had been completed, but the station itself was now a dead hulk drifting in space. Without the central government facility, Ambassador Kethavar noticed the smell first. It was a strange odor that seemed to be getting stronger each day in the corridors near the human quarters. He had been walking to a council meeting when the smell hit him. It was not pleasant. It reminded him of waste and decay. He made a mental note to ask the maintenance department about it later. 3 weeks had passed since Jake Morrison and the other humans had left for what they called a cultural celebration. Kethavar had not thought much about it at first. Different species had different traditions. The humans were known for taking their customs seriously. But 3 weeks seemed like a very long celebration, even for humans. The council meeting that day was about trade disputes between the Chromac and Talari species. General Thok was angry because Talari merchant ships had been late with their deliveries. The Talari representative was frustrated because shipping routes had become unpredictable. Both sides wanted the council to fix the problem immediately. "Where is the human mediator?" asked the Talari representative. Morrison always helps us work out these problems. Kethvar realized he did not know where Morrison was. He is still on leave with his people. The humans are celebrating something important. General Thok slammed his fist on the table. We cannot wait for human holidays. We need answers now. High Counselor Zephyra looked annoyed. Surely we can solve a simple shipping problem without human help. We are not children who need their hand held. But the problem was not simple. The shipping routes between Cromac and Talari space were complex. They involved hundreds of different variables including fuel costs, security risks, and scheduling conflicts. Jake Morrison had spent years learning how to balance all these factors. He could look at a shipping manifest and immediately spot problems that others would miss. Without Morrison, the council members argued for hours without making progress. General Thok wanted to use military force to make the Talari ships move faster. The Talari representative wanted compensation for delays that were not their fault. Zephyra suggested creating new regulations that would make everything more efficient. None of these ideas actually solved anything. After the meeting, Kethvar decided to visit the human quarters. He wanted to ask some of the human staff when Morrison would be returning. The smell in the corridors was even stronger now. It made his eyes water. He passed several maintenance robots that were flashing yellow warning lights. That was unusual. The robots were supposed to be green when everything was working properly. The human quarters were in Section 7 of the station. Kethvar had been there many times for diplomatic meetings and social events. The humans always kept their areas clean and well organized. They decorated the walls with pictures of their homeworld and plants that reminded them of Earth. The children played games in the common areas while adults discussed work and family. But when Kethvar arrived at Section 7, he found empty corridors. The lights were dimmed to save power. The common areas were silent. The doors to individual apartments stood open, revealing rooms with no furniture or personal belongings. Everything was gone. Everyone was gone. Kethvar felt a cold fear growing in his stomach. He walked faster through the empty halls, checking room after room. He found Dr. Lisa Parker's laboratory. The equipment was still there, but all the research files and personal items were missing. He found Captain Burke's security office. The weapons lockers were empty, and the computer terminals were shut down. In the main meeting room of the human quarters, Kethvar found a single datapad sitting on the conference table. The screen showed a message addressed to the Galactic Council. Kethvar read it 3 times before the words really sank in. The humans had left. All of them. They were not coming back. The message was polite but final. It thanked the Council for years of cooperation. It announced humanity's withdrawal from Council space. It wished everyone prosperity and peace. The message was signed by Jake Morrison, Lisa Parker, Ryan Burke, and dozens of other human leaders. At the bottom was a timestamp showing that the message had been recorded the day before the first human ships had departed. Kethvar ran back to the council chambers. He called an emergency meeting and shared the message with the other council members. The reaction was immediate and loud. General Thok accused the humans of betrayal. Zephyra called it an emotional overreaction to some minor disagreement. Other council members demanded to know why no one had noticed the evacuation happening. "How does an entire species just disappear?" shouted the representative from the Nexari. There were thousands of humans on this station alone. Kethvar had no good answer. The humans had left quietly and carefully. They had filed all the proper paperwork. They had made their departure look routine. No alarms had been triggered. No security protocols had been violated. They had simply packed up their lives and walked away. The immediate problem started within hours of the discovery. The waste processing system in Section 12 began backing up. The automated cleaners could not handle certain types of organic waste that required manual removal. Human janitors had always taken care of these special cleaning jobs. Without them, the waste began to accumulate and smell. The translation system that allowed different species to communicate began showing error messages. The software was incredibly complex, handling 847 different languages and thousands of cultural references. Human programmers had maintained and updated the system for decades. They had added new phrases and fixed communication problems between species who thought in completely different ways. Now the system was starting to break down. In the medical bay, Dr. Vorthak of the Nexari species tried to treat a patient from the Flowerian species. but the medical database could not find the right treatment protocols. Dr. Parker had written most of the cross-species medical procedures. She had studied how different alien biologies reacted to various treatments. Without her knowledge, treating patients from unfamiliar species became dangerous guesswork. The shipping problems that had started the day's council meeting got worse. The automated routing system that planned cargo ship paths began sending vessels to the wrong destinations. The system relied on constant updates and adjustments that human logistics coordinators had provided. Without these updates, ships found themselves stranded in empty space or arriving at stations that were not expecting them. HFY spent the next few days trying to contact human colonies throughout council space. He sent messages to Earth, to the mining colony on Kepler 442b, to the research station orbiting Proxima Centauri. Every message came back with the same automated response. The facilities were closed. The inhabitants had relocated. No forwarding information was available. It was as if humanity had planned their disappearance for months or even years. They had evacuated their colonies so gradually that no one had noticed. They had transferred their equipment and supplies to unknown destinations. They had canceled their contracts and closed their accounts. They had erased themselves from council space with surgical precision. Engineer Vorthak worked day and night trying to fix the failing systems. His crystalline body glowed brighter when he was stressed, and now he looked like a small star. He had studied human engineering for years, but understanding how something worked was different from knowing why it worked. The humans had built their systems with an intuitive grasp of how different technologies could work together. They had made thousands of small improvements over time that were not documented anywhere. Diplomat Saren of the Ophidian species tried to mediate the growing disputes between other council members. But she discovered that human diplomacy was more than just translating words between different languages. Humans had understood the emotional and cultural context that shaped how different species communicated. They had known when to push for compromise and when to give negotiators time to save face. Without this understanding, diplomatic meetings became shouting matches that solved nothing. The crisis grew worse each day. More systems failed. More disputes erupted. More council members began asking uncomfortable questions about how much they had depended on human expertise. The quiet competence that had made humans easy to ignore was now impossible to replace. HFY stood in his office looking out at the vast expanse of space beyond the station. Somewhere out there, humanity was building a new life without the council. They had left behind no anger, no demands for justice, no threats of revenge. They had simply walked away from a relationship that no longer served them. For the first time, HFY began to understand what the council had really lost. Jake Morrison stood at the window of the transport ship Meridian and watched the stars change. Behind them, the massive space station called Nexus Prime grew smaller with each passing minute. The station had been his home for 12 years, but today he was leaving it forever. Around him, other humans packed their belongings into storage containers. Children asked their parents why they had to go. The adults gave quiet answers that did not really explain anything. The Meridian was the last human ship to leave the station. Over the past 3 weeks, dozens of other ships had departed. Each one carried families, scientists, engineers, and soldiers away from the Galactic Council. Each departure had been logged as routine transport. No one had asked questions. No one had noticed the pattern. Jake touched the communication panel next to the window. He could send a message to the station if he wanted. He could tell Ambassador HFY and the other council members what was really happening. But the decision had been made months ago. Humanity was leaving, and they were leaving quietly. The decision came after Jake and other human leaders discovered a secret council meeting. The meeting had been about humanity's future in the galaxy. The council members had voted on something they called the Human Management Protocol. The vote had passed by a wide margin. The protocol would limit where humans could build colonies. It would control how many ships humans could have. It would make sure that humanity never became too powerful or too independent. Jake remembered sitting in the hidden listening post with Dr. Lisa, Parker, and Captain Ryan Burke. They had listened to the council debate about humans like they were discussing a pet that had grown too big for its cage. High Counselor Zafira of the Valix species had called humans useful, but unpredictable. General Thok of the Chromac had said humans were good workers but needed strong guidance. Ambassador Kethvar had been the only one to speak in favor of humans, but even he had voted for the protocol in the end. That night, the 3 human leaders had made their choice. They would not fight the council. They would not make angry speeches or demand justice. They would simply leave. All of humanity would leave. They would pack up their lives and find a new home far from council space. The plan had taken months to prepare. Human colonies throughout the galaxy had been quietly evacuated. Ships had been loaded with supplies and equipment. New settlements had been built in the empty space beyond the galactic rim, far from any council patrols. The evacuation had been so gradual that no one noticed. Humans were good at being invisible when they wanted to be. Dr. Lisa Parker walked over to Jake and stood beside him at the window. She was carrying a small bag that contained her most important research files. Everything else had been left behind in her laboratory. She had spent 8 years developing new medical treatments for different alien species. Her work had saved thousands of lives. Now someone else would have to continue it without her. "Do you think they will figure it out soon?" Lisa asked. Jake shrugged. "Maybe in a few days. Maybe longer. They are used to us just doing our jobs without making noise about it." Captain Ryan Burke joined them at the window. He was still wearing his council security uniform, but the badges and rank insignia had been removed. Behind him walked the last group of human security officers. They had been responsible for keeping peace on the station. They had stopped fights between different species. They had protected important visitors. They had made sure the station's many rules were followed. Now the station would have to find other ways to handle security. "The Talari merchant captain asked me why we were all leaving at the same time," Ryan said. "I told him it was a human holiday. He seemed to believe it." The 3 leaders had worked together to make the evacuation look normal. They had filed transfer requests and vacation applications. They had scheduled maintenance on human-operated systems. They had made everything look like routine paperwork. The council's bureaucracy was so large and slow that no one would notice the pattern until it was too late. Jake thought about all the things they were leaving behind. Human engineers had designed many of the station's most important systems. Human scientists had made breakthrough discoveries that had been shared freely with all council species. Human diplomats had prevented dozens of wars through quiet negotiations. Human doctors had treated patients from hundreds of different worlds. Human teachers had educated alien children. Human artists had created beauty that was enjoyed across the galaxy. All of that was ending now, not because humans were angry or bitter, but because they had learned an important lesson. They had learned that being useful was not the same as being valued. They had learned that being needed was not the same as being respected. The council saw humans as tools to be managed, not as partners to be trusted. The ship's captain announced that they would be jumping to faster-than-light travel in 10 minutes. Jake took one last look at Nexus Prime. He could see the lights of the different sectors where various species lived and worked. The human sector was already dark. Empty corridors and vacant apartments waited for someone to notice them. Jake wondered how long it would take for the first systems to fail. Human technicians had maintained thousands of small but important machines throughout the station. Human programmers had written software that kept different computer systems working together. Human janitors had cleaned areas that automated systems could not reach. All of these jobs seemed simple, but they were the foundation that kept everything else working. In his pocket, Jake carried a data pad with the final message that would be delivered to the council. The message was polite and brief. It thanked the council for the opportunity to serve. It announced humanity's withdrawal from council space. It wished the remaining species prosperity among the stars. The message did not mention the management protocol. It did not list complaints or demands. It simply said goodbye. The ship jumped to faster-than-light speed and the stars outside became streaks of light. Jake closed his eyes and tried to imagine the new world waiting for them beyond the rim of the galaxy. It would be a place where humans could build their own future, without asking permission from anyone. It would be a place where they could explore and grow and become whatever they chose to become. Behind them, Nexus Prime continued its slow orbit around the planet Zentara. The light stayed on and the air kept flowing and the artificial gravity kept working, for now. In the human quarters, empty rooms waited in silence for someone to notice that their occupants were never coming back.